Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us for MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. The Detroit mayor's race wasn't the only decision for voters on Tuesday. Several school districts had bond proposals on the ballot, and we'll discuss those results in just a bit. But first tonight, the primary election is over. The field of Detroit mayoral candidates is now just two: Mike Duggan and Benny Napoleon. So what will the next 3 months mean for each candidate? What do they need to do to win in November? And that is where we start tonight with our MiWeek contributors and the editorial page editors of the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press, Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. Gentlemen, it's always good to see you, but especially after a primary night. And just when I thought I've seen everything in Detroit politics, wow, that was an interesting surprise.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen anything like it in Detroit politics or politics anywhere. Write-in candidate to not only, he only needed to get on the ballot. He accomplished that and then some. He got almost half the vote. I think it's just an incredible feat, considering that people had to go in and remember what to do, how to spell his name, fill in the circle. It was just unbelievable.
And I thought, we were thinking that we were going to be waiting for days for these results, too.
Yeah, well,
hang on.
We might have if the results had been less clear. You know, you had 44,000 people write his name in spelled correctly and fill in a circle, so there wasn't anything to argue about. And even if you took the rest of the 5,000 that spelled it differently, if you took it out, he still crushed. So, you know, you got to give a lot of credit to the Duggan campaign, which, you know, started out as a campaign, a regular campaign for mayor, and then had to switch to a voter education campaign to get people to understand how to vote for him. It's very difficult, and nobody in that campaign had any experience in voter education, but they figured out how to do it.
Best ground game I think I've ever seen since the Kilpatrick comeback against Freeman Hendricks, when he turned out all those voters unexpectedly and just fooled everyone.
So great ground campaign, good voter education. What else do you think played a part in this, Stephen?
Well, I mean, you got money. That's always a factor in elections. And Sunday in the Free Press on the editorial page, we're taking a close look at how the money played here. It's pretty remarkable what the super PAC influence was in this race. And this is the first time we've ever seen that kind of thing in a local race. The presidential election last year was really dominated by the super PACs on both sides. In this race, Duggan's super PAC outraised him and outspent him on his behalf. He ended up with about $2.4 million worth of support, as opposed to Napoleon's $600,000. That's a real imbalance, and I think that has a lot to do with it.
And that could backfire. Going into this primary, Duggan was the underdog, and you know, people love an underdog.
Yes.
They thought, oh, he was wrong. If Benny can take that money disadvantage and spin it as, hey, look at what I'm running against. I'm running against all this money, all these special interests. He could grab that underdog
and the special
mantle.
interests are people that people know. Roger Penske gave $500,000 to that super PAC. Wow. Vanguard Health, who bought the DMC from Mike Duggan, gave $100,000 to his super PAC. Dan Gilbert's Quicken Loans gave $80,000. I mean, there's a lot of names in there that people will recognize and see as people, you know, they're legitimate interests in the city. I mean, there's nothing, they're not doing anything wrong. But it does look like they're trying to have an outsized influence.
And you can't claim to be the underdog if you have four times as much money as your opponent.
That's right.
Okay, before we get into the lineup of what Mike Duggan needs to do and what Benny Napoleon needs to do, has this changed the way we think about write-in campaigns? Because we've talked about this, saying, oh, write-in campaigns, they don't usually work. It's an uphill battle. No. You can pretty much forget it. But has this totally changed the way we think about
this was a very unique election and a unique campaign. Duggan executed it very, very well. But also, most elections you're going to run into are not going to have a 15, 16, 17% turnout. That low turnout allowed Duggan to target a very specific group of voters and get them to the polls. You start getting normal turnouts of 40, 50, 60%, and a write-in campaign is going to be much, much harder.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you had sort of a witch's brew here of circumstances that made it possible for Mike Duggan to do this. I mean, you had such a weak field otherwise, and really only one other choice that I think that change vote in Detroit, which I think is the core of the electorate now, would even have considered. I mean, those voters were not looking at Tom Barrow or Crystal Crittenden or Sigmund Shepkowski or whoever. They were only looking at Benny Napoleon and Mike Duggan, and Benny, I think, did himself a disservice by not appealing to those voters at all. There's
Well-
nothing he said that would have captured their
But
Does-
beyond that,
interest.
I mean, Napoleon didn't really campaign in the primary.
Well, that's why, yeah,
he didn't
right.
show up for most forums. You didn't see a whole lot of advertising. He laid
Why?
out. Well, because he knew
Why?
he was going to win the primary. Remember, the primary is just to get on the ballot. He figured he
What, he wanted to save money and time?
sure save money, not expose himself
Oh, but he
to
didn't save any
too
money.
early.
He raised $600,000 and they spent $5.
But he
So-
wasn't out there really beating the hustings. I mean, Benny laid low in this primary. He knew he was going to be on the primary. He assumed he'd be the top vote getter. He got surprised here. I think had you had a more active campaign from Benny, might have been a little different story.
Well, and it's got to be a different message, right? I mean, his message the whole time was, I'm a
Safe.
Detroiter. I've been here my whole life, and that's the reason you ought to vote for me. And I think that core of the Detroit electorate right now is not really, they're not really interested.
So what
in
does he
that.
have to do?
He's got to talk
something.
about how he's going to change the city. He's got to talk about how he's going to get the lights back on and get cop response time down. All the things that people keep saying affect their lives in Detroit have got to get addressed. And Duggan, I think, did a better job in the primary of at least saying, here's some of the things I might do, or here's some of the ideas I might have. Napoleon didn't even endeavor that, and I think he figured it's old school Detroit. You know, Detroiters will identify with me more than I identify with Mike Duggan. He was absolutely wrong in this case, so he's got to switch it up for the general.
I want to talk a little bit about kind of the narrative that you had talked about, that Mike Duggan is the underdog and kind of played against that Tom Barrow was the villain in this case, and he maybe benefited from that. And I think he probably benefited from a lot of free publicity, because every time we were talking about the mayoral primary, it was Mike Duggan, he's on, he's off. So you have the repetition of the name here. How does Mike Duggan have to change that around? Because he can't obviously sail on that for the next 3 months.
Well, I think the core of his message is that he's a turnaround guy. And, the association with the DMC, I wouldn't underestimate that. As he said on election night, people know the DMC. They are very familiar with it. They're either a patient there, they've got friends or family who've worked there, they work there themselves, very familiar with that institution and what's happened with it. And sort of that connection with that turnaround, I think, helped him as much as anything else, because he had something to show. He had something to take to voters and say, look what I've done, I can do it here.
Will the residency issue be a problem for him in this next 3 months? Will that come back around? And what kind of, part do you see perhaps race playing in this in the next 3 months?
Well, the residency issue, I think, is dead. I mean, that was the cudgel that everyone was trying to get at him with in the,
So that's
in
gone.
the primary, and he got 53% of the vote. I mean, I think that it's clear Detroiters are not interested in that discussion. Race is a different issue, and that the residency issue is sort of a proxy for race in some ways, but it's not the total race issue in this region. And I think there's no way in a city with Detroit's history, in a city with Detroit's makeup, that you'll have a major, white major candidate for mayor run without race being discussed and being part of the calculus that people use to make their decision.
In a lot of different ways, and you won't be always overt, but I was struck on election night listening to Benny's victory speech where he talked about being the mayor of the neighborhoods and not downtown. To me, that was code of, I'm going to be the mayor for the black Detroiters, not the white business community. And I think you're going to hear a lot of those types of references as the campaign rolls out.
What do you expect we're going to see in the next 3 months? Do you sit back now and say, wow, I can't wait to see what happens next?
Oh, I think this is going to be one of the most spirited mayoral campaigns we've seen in a very long time in Detroit. I mean, I think you go back to 1993 when Dennis Archer and Sharon McPhail really just duked it out to the end. I think we could see something like that this time. I don't expect that Mike Duggan will have the kind of ease of victory in the fall that he did in the primary. It's going to be closer, and I'm not sure we're going to know the day before Election Day who's going to win.
What do you think? What do you anticipate seeing?
The day after Election Day, after all of this heated campaign and all of this excitement, whoever wins the mayor is going to be told, okay, take a seat for a year or so. We don't have much for you to do. That's going to be, it'll be interesting to see how folks react to that.
Meet Kevin Orr. He's working just down the hall from you. And speaking of